Hi everyone, welcome to Off the Podium. I have a guest, trumpet player, martial artist, and all-around awesome person I've gotten to know over Facebook primarily, but not this is the first time I'm speaking to him on the phone. Barry, welcome to Off the Podium.
Thanks, I appreciate it. And isn't it interesting that we're in this age now where you actually make friends and actually have relationships with people and get to know them like almost on a pretty profound level, and you've never met them before.
Yeah,
You know them through social media,
yeah,
which is kind of bizarre, but that's the world we live in. And I suppose on some level, it's allowing people that would never meet each other to meet each other from all over the world.
yeah.
So it's kind of cool. It's kind of weird, but it's kind of cool at the same time.
Well, the great thing is that you post so many interesting things on the line, and I've been a big fan. And I think when I was you know uh, preparing some things to talk to you about, I also went back and read some of our conversation, and I remember saying, "Hey, are you recording? Are you have a database of the things that you post on Facebook?" And you were like, "No, I don't really have that." But some of the things you post are so interesting and so thoughtful that I just wish there was, somehow down a couple of years down the road, maybe you'll have time to put that all in a book, Barry Danielian book.
Yeah, you're not the first person. A lot of people are like encouraging me to do that, or to start blogging, or start doing my own podcast, or all of that sounds good, and it's actually something that I think I probably would be pretty good at, and it might be of benefit to people. But right now, I just don't have the time because I'm in school full time. I'm working, my family, trying to find time to train. There's just so many balls in the air, as it were. But at some point down the road, that won't be the case, and maybe I will. It's been interesting, the whole. Aside from my friends and my kind of circle of people, the martial arts circle and the music circle, and the spiritual people and people that are into healing and whatnot. Aside from them, just random people who I don't even know that will inbox me saying, "Hey, man, I appreciate what you wrote. It really made me think about this or think about that." So I guess aside from posting pictures of what you had for dinner, I guess on some level the social media thing, it starts conversations. And I know for me personally, engaging with people that aren't necessarily from the same, either politically or worldview wise, not necessarily aligned with how I view things. Nonetheless, I read what they say and I consider it and I do some of my own research. And sometimes, I change my position on a topic because somebody from another viewpoint really made me think about things differently, and it helped me to grow. And I think that's a beautiful thing. It's like playing a gig in a genre that you're not used to, and you kind of go to the gig not really knowing what to expect, and you get your butt kicked.
Yeah.
And because of that, you end up becoming a better musician, having gone through that experience in a situation that you maybe at the outset weren't really into.
Yeah. And you said something about changing positions, and that's something great, because one thing that's upset me, just not just because of the current, the past year or so, but just in general, one thing that's upset me is that sometimes when you don't have the same views as another person, you try to push that person away instead of actually just trying to better understand that person through conversation, meeting them. Some people are just like, I'm not going to talk to this person because they believe this or that, or they have this political stance or that. The best thing to do is just to really try to understand that person and where they're coming from. And that's one thing that I appreciate about what you write, is that you never take sides. And you do, but it's never trying to push other people away. And that's one thing that I truly appreciate about what you do online.
Well, thanks, man. It doesn't do any good to do that, number one. And number two, I've found, especially on topics that can be touchy, where people are passionate about.
Yeah.
I've found that when you actually try and get people to define their terms, a lot of disagreements or a lot of turbulence tends to smooth out, because a lot of times what happens is people, like, just to use a basic example, like, because there's so much political, chaos going on right now. I have friends that, let's say some of my martial arts friends from Texas, who tend to be, very conservative. But when I ask them, well, when you say you're conservative, what do you mean by that? How do you define that? And then I'll explain to them what the positions that I have, and I'm not liberal all across the board. There's certain things I'm liberal on, certain things I'm not. But then when I define what I believe that to be, a lot of times our understanding was completely different. Mm-hmm. So when somebody says, yeah, I'm conservative, what I think they mean oftentimes is not what they really mean by that.
Yeah.
And part of that is because we have like a media and we have these external constructs that define these words for us and create these labels and these categories that we're all supposed to fit into neatly. And we just, I say we as a general term because obviously not everybody goes along with this, but, a lot of people are happy just to accept that. And I found that, when you actually talk with people, most people do not fit quite neatly into these categories. And even somebody that is a conservative, quote unquote, how we would traditionally define that word, when you press them on certain issues, it's like, oh, well, wait a minute. So you're not completely against, taxes going to pay for this or to pay for that, because it is a benefit to the greater society. So I guess government isn't all bad, is it? And conversely, you could make the argument, and I've made the argument with liberal people that, if person A works their ass off for 25 years and person B, for whatever reason, decides of their own free will that, they're kind of a slacker. We all know that there are people that are slackers, and there are people that are like, overachievers. Well, you should, nothing works out in a completely balanced equation, but the one guy busts his ass, he deserves to get what he worked for. He deserves to get all of that. Whatever he has coming to him, he deserves that. And the other person deserves what he gets too. But if he doesn't work quite as hard as the next guy, I don't think the guy that worked hard should hand over some of his so everything's all, nothing in life is even Steven. It's not everybody gets exactly what they deserve. And we both know people that have worked their ass off and are super talented and don't quite get the breaks. And maybe the next guy who maybe isn't quite as talented, he seems to not have to do too much and all the things go his way.
Yeah.
This is just life. There's nothing you can really do about that. But in terms of general principles, I think when you drill down on people and get them to define their terms, we don't fall so neatly into these categories. We're a mixture of a lot of different views, and I think the smart people among us are not opposed to changing their views, or when presented with evidence and then, you contemplate, if something doesn't make sense to you anymore, you cut it loose and you change your viewpoint. That's just part of growing. It's like us practicing. If you're practicing out of whatever thing you're practicing and you're not getting any results out of it, at a certain point you have to change it up to try and get better. You can't just keep, Anyways, I'm kind of babbling.
No, this is... I love it. This is great. And the great thing about all of this is that we technically have not even touched on your career as a musician, but I won't go too far back, but as I've said, I love your Facebook posts. If you don't mind, I'm going to read one of them, and I'm not going to go too far back, so you'll know which one I'm talking about. How long is and you said, how long is the distance between the American dream and the American reality? Not all American dreams dream the same dream or live the same reality. We tend to forget that in many ways our country is a social experiment based on certain ideals, not always equally accessible by all partaking in this experiment. You said something that's very interesting, and I don't know if you really want to get into this, but the social experiment part, that's what kind of got me interested in this particular post. Why do you say that?
Well, because I think, I think our country is unique in the sense that historically, depending on how far you go back, people were, grouped around their tribal, delineations, or their ethnic groupings, which also on some level were tribal. And then, religious groupings, the Christian lands, the Islamic lands, the Confucian lands, or maybe based on a language, but the American experiment is we're basing a society on a set of principles or even laws of social justice and governance, self-governance, and anybody that comes here, regardless of your skin color, regardless of your religion, regardless of your gender, regardless of anything, those principles in theory now apply equally to everybody. And the opportunities of a republic that functions the way it does, those opportunities in theory are equal to everybody. So in a certain sense, it's on you. There's these principles that protect everybody and give freedoms to everybody, and then we all just work it out. We all hash it out and work and try to create what we create, and the success of which or the failure of which, and even if you fail, you start up again. That's a unique thing, but the reality of that is not quite true. The truth of it is that, if you have black skin, you're the way in which you were brought into this experiment was not the same as Europeans who came over here for different reasons. And we can go down the list. We can go, the Native Americans that were already here, and then, leaving the Native Americans and African people of African descent, leaving them on the side. We also know that all the groups that came here kind of had to go through some shit before they were fully accepted. The people that came here and created America on some level, despite the ideals of those principles, I think they had certain people in mind more than others. Now we've evolved past that on some level. We have, to be fair, it's not the same as it was before. But we still have a long way to go, and I think that part of moving forward. I can't remember what teacher at Berkeley told me this, but he told me that in order to innovate, the ability to move the music forward precludes the fact that you go backwards. In other words, his thing was the more you understood the tradition and the further back you went into those roots and really dug deep into those musical roots, that kind of gave you the fuel to be able to innovate, to push things forward. And I think that there's a similar thing at play in terms of our ability to engage honestly with our history as a country. And, we're not perfect. No country is perfect. And great nations throughout history have been incredibly paradoxical because on the one hand, our country has contributed incredibly great things to humanity.
Of course.
But on the other hand, we do some foul stuff as well. And I don't think we're unique in that. I think the only difference is the level of power that we have means that what we do literally affects the whole world. And that was much different 1,000 years ago, or 2,000 years ago, or even 500 years ago.
Well, all this talk...
So,
Oh, go for it. Sorry.
No. I mean, I just think that, I was talking, that quote was kind of in the context of race, and what was going on in Charlotte, and, just people kind of going into hysteria and, tear all the statues down and blah, 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 blah. And I've got kind of mixed feelings about that. And it's funny because I was at the gym the other day and I was talking to an older black man who's a boxing coach, and he was like, if they tear the statues down but nothing really changes, who cares? I'd rather leave the statues up and let's deal with the real issues and change the real issues that are causing economic injustice. And we don't need any more. He was like, we don't need any more Band-Aids. We need to get down to it and really look at the real root causes of these issues. But I'm just not sure that we have the collective willpower or collective honesty to do that yet.
Well,
I'm not convinced.
All this talk made me think about your last name. And Danielian, I associate with an Armenian ethnic background. Is that so?
Yeah, I'm half Armenian. My dad is Armenian, and my mother is Italian.
Oh wow.
So I'm a mutt. Yeah, I'm a mutt, like
You
most Americans.
you
I'm a mixture.
you
And my
got.
wife is Nicaraguan,
Oh
and
wow.
my kids are Armenian, Italian, Nicaraguan. So it's like,
It's best of
nobody knows
different
what
parts
they
of the
are.
world. It's the best of three places around the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Now let's go. Let's get to the actual trumpet playing and the start in trumpet. How you got to picking the instrument, or were your parents musicians? How did that whole thing happen?
My parents were not musicians, but they were music lovers. So there was always music, in my house. My father was a big fan of classical music and of big bands,
Mm-hmm.
and my mother also liked big bands and jazz. Um, my uncle Frank, who is like the uncle that I was closest to, he was into country western. He played guitar. He called himself the Italian hillbilly, and he played guitar and was into Johnny Cash and all the old school country stuff. So I actually started on guitar and didn't really dig it. I was lefty, so that created some problems. But I didn't really take to it. I took to the music, but I didn't take to the guitar. And then these guys used to come to school in September, early in the year, every year, and they would come, and this is a trumpet, and this is what a trumpet sounds like, and this is a saxophone, and this is what a saxophone sounds like. They go through the whole thing,
Yeah.
and anybody that wanted to sign up for music could sign up, and I really loved the sound of the trumpet, and I think a lot of it had to do with my dad playing big band, and hearing Kenton and Basie, and just hearing that big band music. I really dug the sound of the trumpet, and also probably right around the same time, I was the variety shows were a big thing, so there was always live performance on TV, and hearing Louis Armstrong and Al Hirt and different artists playing live, that also got me, so I switched from guitar and started playing trumpet at age 8.
Oh wow.
And I'm 55 now, so, a long time playing the trumpet.
So there must be some interesting events over your career that have taken place. You've played with some of the biggest names in the music industry in from different genres too. Anything that comes to mind that has happened, maybe on stage with the fans, someone, just some interesting stories that you might have from touring all over the world.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but the most interesting ones I probably can't tell.
Ah, come on.
But, I mean, what's interesting to me, because I do play in so many different genres of music, is just to see how the music has the ability to break down those barriers with people.
Yeah.
And it happens no matter what genre. If I've gone to Europe with like so many different artists. So let's compare. Let's say like I go to Europe with Eddie Palmieri versus going to Europe with Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah.
Or going to Europe with Barbra Streisand. So there's a triangle of 3 really different artists, different genres, and you would think different audiences, but once the music starts playing, man, the responses always seem to be the same. Like, people are just affected by music, and so all these boundaries of either language or even the boundary of the genre of music seems to disappear the minute the music starts playing.
Yeah.
So, it just kind of shows the power of music and the transcendent nature of music to be able to kind of wash away delineations that we put up, whether it's musical delineations or, the language or cultures or whatever. It's just interesting to see the response of people once you start playing. And what I've noticed all over the world is the responses tend to be the same.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when we hit like a mambo in Eddie's band where, he's building up the energy, and finally we hit the mambo and the rhythm is like a freight train, people are going nuts, and they're going nuts in Korea, they're going nuts in Europe, wherever we play, they're going nuts. And I would see the same thing happen with Bruce, even though it's completely different music, but that same feeling of build up, build up, build up, build up, and then the groove kicks in again on full throttle. That same feeling happens to people, you know. So it's kind of, it kind of proves what I've always suspected, and I would think that, you know, on someday scientists will be able to prove this, that we're hardwired for music. There's something in our neurology or in our DNA that hardwires us so that people have a shared experience, even on like a cellular level or something with music.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're wielding like a very powerful thing, you know.
Well,
so I mean, I would say that general thing is the heaviest thing, the heaviest experience. You know, and if I had to give a particular, it would probably, I mean, walking out onto stage in Milan, we played the soccer stadium. I think it was close to 80,000 people, and the fans had these like placards that spelled out "Our love is real." I mean, that shit was like, you know, I was almost in tears on stage because it was so powerful.
Yeah.
Just that, first of all, to even be able to pull that off, how did they do that? You know, like in a huge soccer stadium, and just the feeling of that many people giving you love when you walk out on stage, it's pretty overwhelming. You know, it was almost hard to play, really, to be honest with you, because it was just so, the energy was so intense, you know. So that's, you know, that's some powerful stuff, man.
Yeah. And going back, I just realized you said that you're in school, and I remember reading something about medicine, Oriental Medicine.
The Chinese medicine.
This great career as a trumpet player, accomplished martial artist, and now a different route. What's the story behind that?
Yeah. Well, I have been on the receiving end of Chinese medicine since 1983, when I started touring with Blood, Sweat, and Tears. I was having, you know, like digestive issues and like different, just, you know, I probably wasn't like eating the cleanest food in the world, and just road life. And so, you know, I went to Western doctors, and pretty much they were like, well, you know, here's these medicine, here's the pills, take the pills, and you won't get these symptoms anymore. But what I noticed is once I stopped taking the pills, then the stuff would come back again. So it didn't seem like it was really curing anything. So I started doing some research, and I was reading about Chinese medicine, acupuncture and herbs and whatnot. So I went to, you know, a guy in Chinatown in New York, and I was immediately drawn to just, there was a certain kind of elegance to the way he was and the way he viewed me and the types of questions that he was asking. It was kind of like he wasn't just treating the issue that I had, but he was actually treating me. And, you know, it worked. Like within one treatment, I was feeling like 50% better, and after a few treatments, like it was gone, and I never had those issues since. So I've gone back over the years for various, you know, martial arts injuries, blah, 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 blah. So I've seen how effective it is, and I've seen it with my wife and my kids and so many friends that I've recommended. And then a lot of, you know, historically in China, the healing and the martial arts were very much intertwined. A lot of the great fighters and great martial arts masters were also great healers. So that connection in martial arts, not just in China, but throughout Asian culture, and I don't know for a fact, but I suspect even within Western culture, like within, you know, the ancient Romans, I suspect that there was also that same connection. But in any event, a lot of my friends were acupuncturists and herbologists, and that were my martial arts bros. So I became more and more interested learning about it, and there's a lot of similarities because, you know, bone setting is a part of Chinese medicine, and it's basically the same way that you would break a bone. You just go the opposite direction, and you can reset the bone. So a lot of the stuff that I was learning in martial arts, now that I'm in school, I realize that it's kind of come in handy. I actually have had an advantage over a lot of my classmates because I've been putting my hands on people in a different way, but I'm very familiar with the body and pathways and energetic pathways and all that stuff. So anyways, I just started realizing that, the music business is changing. There's not, is the a lot of us, I was a studio musician really, like for most of the 90s and early 2000s. I was in New York and doing like tons of session work, and all that stuff started drying up. The business changed. The jingle scene has basically gone away. Some of its technology has changed things. And then also the reality is like, as I've gotten older, I'm not the young guy anymore. So, Bruno Mars is not going to call me. He's going to call, the younger guy is to go do the tour. And that's just a natural progression that's always been there. I think the difference is that a generation or two ago, there was other scenes available that older guys started, could move over into to get work.
Yeah.
And I'm just seeing, an unfortunate work situation. And even though I've been doing Broadway, for the last 20 years or so, I wanted to stay home and raise my kids and not be on the road as much. So Broadway offered steady employment and health benefits and a pension, but it's nothing that I really dig doing that much musically. It's not very satisfying for me to just play the same thing 8 times a week, week after week, month after month.
Yeah.
So I kind of made the decision. I kind of said, look, 20 years ago, my feeling was, I'll play anything as long as it's good quality. As long as I'm playing my horn, I'm cool, and I can make a living. As I've gotten older and seeing what's happening with the business, I'm kind of like, maybe I want to get something else happening and start getting back to playing the kind of music that I want to be playing and get more into just the reasons I started playing in the first place, to be creative and to play music for the creativity of it and not have so much determined by, making a living.
Yeah.
So that's the pragmatic aspect of how I got into it. The other aspect is it's something that I've been really into for 30 years. I mean, I have a huge library of books on Chinese medicine that I was into before I started going to school. And so I just decided, who says I can't do this? You know what I mean? Who says that you have to do just one thing, or that because you do another thing, you stop doing the thing that you're doing? I don't have to do that. Who says I have to stop playing? I can do both. I can do all this stuff. I mean, I think we put limits on ourselves that are, another artificial construct,
Yeah.
I enrolled in school. I'm almost a third of the way through the program. It's been really inspiring, learning, getting under the hood and really learning the cosmology and the science behind this medicine. It's really rigorous, I'm having to really be very disciplined with my time and studying, because there's so much stuff you have to memorize, all the herbs and all their properties, and then, 365 herbs and over 400 acupuncture points and all the theory. And so it's pretty intense, but, I'm really digging it. And I feel very inspired, and I think that inspiration that's coming from that is translating over into everything that I do. So, that's kind of the long and short of it.
No, that's great. When I said I'm talking to Barry Danielian on Facebook, Bruce Steelins, who's a big band guy and who lived in New York for many years, he wrote this. He said, Barry, I left NYC 9 years ago as I began to see how the scene was changing. Tell us how you have seen it change over your long and successful career there. And to a certain extent already answered the question, so shout out to Bruce, because he wanted that question answered. So
I mean, it's changed. I remember when I got to town around 82, 83. The guys that were older than me, I was taking lessons with John Faddis at the time. And John was telling me, man, I used to do 20 to 25 sessions a week. And if I wanted to do more, I could.
Wow.
And I remember thinking to myself, wow, I would like to get to the point where I can do 20 sessions in a month.
Yeah.
And eventually I got to that point where I was doing like 4 or 5 sessions every week, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, but I got really busy in the recording, industry. And now, man, if I do 20 sessions in a year, that's a busy year, I mean, I do stuff where people send me tracks and I record at home and email the stuff back to them. But as far as like going into a studio in a room with players and an engineer and all that kind of stuff, like what we used to do, man, that's like a rare event now, So, I mean, I just think that there's realities that are undeniable. There's a lot of reasons for that. Technology is one, the business is one. I think there's a strong argument to be made that because arts education got cut so severely back in the 80s that now, people just don't value it. I mean, people, like my daughters are maybe different because their dad's a musician, but I know people of their generation, they don't think that they should have to pay for music. Oh, why are you paying for it? You can just get it over here for free. It's like, well, what about the guy that has spent his whole life? So if people don't value it enough to pay for it, then how do you keep this thing going? How do you, I don't know what the answer is. But I think Bruce is right. There's no shortage of great players. They keep coming and they can play. There's really no work. There's no work. I don't know how guys are making a living anymore.
Yeah. And another question that I got, and this one's from my brother, and he always watches the podcasts, every single one of them. He's the biggest fan, but he rarely asks questions. I think this might be his first one. So he said, how was it playing with Dizzy?
Yeah, it was great, man, because I was pretty young. I was right out of college. In fact, no, I wasn't. I was in my last year at Patterson. And I got the gig with this guy, Luis Perico Ortiz, who at that time had like the kind of the hottest salsa band in New York. So we would do salsa meets jazz all the time, and that was a Monday night gig at the Village Gate, and there would be 2 salsa bands and a jazz artist who would come out and play with both bands. Mm-hmm. And so I got to do that with Dizzy a handful of times and got to know him. And he was exactly how I imagined him to be. I mean, he was really warm and just a real generous spirit and had a great sense of humor and super intelligent, sharp mind, and real generous with his time with me, And the first time I met him, he just kind of like grabbed me and said, come on, come with me. And like I went into his dressing room and I'm sitting, like I don't know him from Adam, I had met him for the first time, and here I'm sitting in Dizzy Gillespie's dressing room, and he's like, do you do any exercises for your breathing? And I said, well, not, some yoga breathing and some this and some that. And he's like, yeah, you check this exercise out. And he was kind of doing some of these yoga planks, and he was doing different kind of exercises for his breathing. And he showed me some kind of like drills that he did on trumpet where he would put dimes on top of the valve caps.
Interesting.
And so in order to be able to play, your fingers had to stay glued to the valve caps.
Wow.
John Faddis showed me the same thing.
Wow.
Now when I do it, the dimes immediately start falling all over the place. But they could, So, and, it was a thrill. I was probably 21 years old, and here I am meeting like one of my heroes,
Yeah.
So it was amazing,
Since we're on the stories, I saw that you play with one of my favorite pop artists, and I don't know if I should call him pop or rock or whatever, but Sting. Any stories on Sting? Mm-hmm. Anything that you experienced playing with him?
Well, the Sting, I have been part of Sting's Rainforest Band. He has this Rainforest Foundation where he does these gigs, like I think it used to be once a year. I think now it's once every other year, to raise money for his Rainforest Foundation. So it's a band, unbelievable band. Narada Michael Walden, the drummer, is the MD. The first year I did it, it was Hiram Bullock on guitar, Larry Carlton on guitar, Greg Fillinganes on piano, Will Lee on bass, the best background singers in New York, great horn set, it's just like thrilling.
Yeah.
And Sting and James Taylor. Sting's great, man. I mean, he's a great musician, and he knows what he wants. He's got a real good ear for detail. What I also noticed about him was that he's not a micromanager. He knows what he wants, but once he tells you what he wants, he seems to be confident enough to just let the cats kind of work it out.
Yeah.
To let whereas other artists, they try to micromanage, or they need to be involved in every minutia, every step of the way.
Yeah.
And sometimes that that doesn't get you the best results. It has more to do with kind of their own neuroses than anything else.
Yeah.
But what I dig about Sting is he knows what he wants, he explains what he wants, and then he kind of lets it happen like organically.
Yeah.
He kind of has a jazz musician sensibility. That's how I would phrase it.
Well,
even though he's a pop guy, definitely has. He's got that jazz musician sensibility in terms of, here's a basic concept of what I'm trying to go for. Now let's just play and let it evolve and get there in a natural kind of way. And so I really respect that about him.
Well, I think Sting in the early days of his career, I think from what I remember reading in his book, he did mention something about playing in a big band or something. I just don't remember. I know he has some kind of a a jazz kind of a background in some way. I know not many years, but to a certain extent he does. I want to ask you a question. With so many years of experience, what advice would you give to young aspiring musicians, or just young people in general in today's world, 21st century?
Oof, man, that's a loaded question, bro. That's a loaded question. I mean, if we're talking about young people going into music,
sure,
I would give them the advice of, man. I mean, I think the advice is probably the same as what I would give 20 years ago at any time, even though now there's certain things that are different. But I would still give the same advice, and that's that I think that you have to balance your creative essence with the pragmatic reality of making a living.
Yeah.
If you're planning on making a living playing music, I mean, I have friends that they do something else to make their bread, and so when they play, they don't have to think about, they're just playing to play.
Yeah.
There's no, so their equation is a little different. But I think, if there's some young trumpet player who's coming out of school and he said, okay, I want to be able to support myself and make a living playing trumpet, I think that, you have to develop, what you're, in terms of your artistry, you have to feed that part of your soul, and you have to try and have a game plan, I think, like, how am I going to get my music out there? How am I going to develop my music? How am I going to develop my sound? How am I going to do all these things?
Yeah.
On the other side of the equation, I think that you have to also make sure that you have tools in your toolbox, and a lot of times those tools aren't necessarily talent. There's just skills that you have to have. So if you get called to go play in a big band, or you get called to do a club date, or you get called to do a session or a salsa gig, you can go in and you can take care of business. I remember when I had just left Patterson, Rufus Reed asked me to come in and sub for him, teaching the big band, running a few of the big band rehearsals and whatnot. And so what I noticed is when it came to the solos, cats were killing. They were playing great solos. Guys had great, they had a lot of language together, but the parts were like a little raggedy.
Yeah.
The pitch was a little raggedy.
Yeah.
The ensemble playing was a little raggedy. So what I said to them is if you get called to go to the Vanguard on Monday night and play with the Vanguard Orchestra, and I was directing it to the trumpet player because he had like a little bit of an attitude, so I kind of felt like I had to yank his chain a little bit. So if you get called, if Scott Winholt calls you up to sub for him on the Vanguard, and you're playing Scott's book, which is the jazz chair, the solo chair, how many minutes of that whole gig is going to be you soloing, do you think? And he's like, well, I don't know. I said, well, let's say Scott gets one solo each set. So that's 2 sets. He gets one solo. They're going to let him stretch out a little bit. 10 minutes, 15 minutes at the most.
Mm-hmm.
I said, yeah, that sounds about right. What are you going to be doing the rest of the time? You're going to be playing in the section. You're going to be playing parts. If you crap all over the parts and sound horrible all over the parts, do you think that they will call you back no matter how good your solos were? Well, probably not. Yeah, probably not, because there's 20 guys that can come in and play a great solo and will play the parts.
Yeah.
And can play good in the section and can play in tune.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just the reality of it. You know, that's what you're competing against. You're competing against guys who can blow, and guys like Ryan Kaiser, who like are genius improvisers, and he can play lead trumpet in Lincoln Center. You know, I mean, he's not doing the gig now, but for years he was their lead trumpet player, and could sit there and read the hardest charts and play the shit flawlessly.
Wow.
So that's what you're up against, you know. So, I mean, I think that you have to, you know, I mean, unless you have a trust fund that you don't have to worry about paying your bills and you can just purely focus on whatever the artistic thing is that you want to do. But if you're not that person, and I suspect most people aren't, then if you're going to be able to pay the bills, you have to have them tools, you know, to be able to do that. And the business is changing, and you know, I think technology, you know, I'm sitting here in my studio recording tracks for an NHL thing. The guy sent me the track. I got it in Logic. I got my mic. I got my horns out here. I'm going to, like, stack up a bunch of brass and email it back to them. That's the studio musician gig of, you know, it's no longer you go to a room and it's all set up and you just put your headphones on and the engineer has everything hooked up and you just play.
Yeah.
I got to know how to record myself, and I have to know how to do all this technical stuff that I dig it, so I've learned how to do it, but that's also part of the reality, I think, of being a musician these days.
Yeah.
So you got to have those skills together as well.
Oh, man.
So, yeah, man, you know, it's ever evolving. Although I suspect the young guys coming up have grown up with this technology, so for them it's probably easy. I had to learn, you know, like I got into it like in the 90s when I was touring with Tower. I started getting into, you know, programming and recording myself and all that shit.
It's a tough world these days, but on a different topic, well, sort of in the same path, I was talking to Christian McBride. He was on one of my podcasts. And we talked about how jazz kind of took some things from classical music, and not the good things, I must say. You know, they're going in the same direction and they're losing audiences the same way, I believe, just as classical music, and kind of taking jazz to the concert halls and having a similar approach, trying to make jazz an academic sort of music where it's really the music of the people. What are your feelings about that? Because of course, jazz has an academic side, and classical music too, but they've kind of let go of being the music of the people and being more academic in a way. I don't know what the best way of explaining this is, but it's just tough to see that jazz is in the same situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of truth to that. You know, when I was playing with Illinois Jacquette's band, he said something that was really interesting. He said that for most of jazz, he said for most of the history of this music, it was dance music.
Yeah.
And people forget that. And that really stuck with me, you know. And I do think, you know, I think the quote-unquote institutionalization, you know, bringing jazz into the scholarly quote-unquote environment and into the respectful concert hall environment, I think that is a response to injustices in regards to how the music was perceived and how those geniuses who were playing it were treated.
Yeah.
So I understand that. I mean, I understand why people in certain positions of power that are able to go into the corporate world and be able to get funding and backing to be able to create these kind of institutions, I can understand that impulse and why they would do that. On the other hand, you know, there's some grit that gets lost along the way. There's a certain thing, you know, I mean, this was always music connected to the street, so to speak, you know. Yeah. And I think that, you know, when you get too far away from that, it can lose something. And also I think what can start to happen is that the whole concept of the canon of a music starts to lock things in a little bit. You know, it starts to, you know, to me that's a very Eurocentric approach to music, that, you know, jazz has a certain canon and has a certain, and I'm not arguing that there isn't truth to that, because there is, there is a language to the music, and there's a lineage to the music, and there's a history, and we have to understand the lineage of the people that came before us and how one person influenced the next person and all that. But I think ultimately knowing all that is a means for you to find you and find your sound. And I think it's not a means to get stuck chasing that canon of music that you have to be playing this certain shit to be valid in the eyes of, you know, the grand magisterium of jazz, who is judging who is valid and not valid or whatever. I don't know. To me, hip-hop is more connected to that spirit of how probably, if we were able to go back in time, how Charlie Parker and Dizzy and those cats probably were thinking. I think maybe the hip-hop guys are more in line with that than guys sitting in, you know, working on their PhD in jazz studies. I don't know, man. I'm just not, you know, I'm kind of old school in the sense that a lot of the stuff that I hear, to me, it just sounds like math equations. It just sounds like cats sat at home and worked out all this shit to play to impress their other musician friends. And I don't really, I'm more from the storyteller. I want to be moved physically. I want my feet to be tapping, and I want to hear a story, you know? And that doesn't mean that I don't need, that doesn't mean that the language can't be sophisticated. But I just think that, I don't know, man. You know, when I was teaching up at Purchase, I was mostly teaching trumpet, but occasionally I would have an ensemble. And I found it odd that, and the ensemble that I had, all the guys were very high-level college players. You know, there wasn't really, at that point, there wasn't really much for me to teach them. It was really more about, I would listen to them play, and I would maybe make some suggestions about how they could approach a tune, or maybe think about this, or maybe think about that, because cats were already playing at a very high level. But what struck me was they never wanted to play the blues. They never wanted to play in 4. It was always, you know, let's play Inner Urge in 7, or let's play Giant Steps in 5. And it's like, man, like, is it now, like, out of fashion to play the blues and make the shit just swing like a motherfucker and have it feel good? And, you know, is that, like, out of fashion now? I don't get it, you know? So I don't know. Maybe I'm just, like, old.
It's, a lot of people, a lot of kids in college, I think they maybe feel that it's not just out of fashion, but maybe just too easy for them. And they're going for something fancier and more grand. So I don't know what the deal is.
Yeah, I don't know. You know, I don't know. I mean, I know that, you know, I guess I always think that ultimately it comes down to, why are you playing?
Yeah.
You know, asking yourself that question. You know,
and we forget to ask that question.
Yeah. You know, why are you playing?
Yeah.
Are you playing to, you know, to be the baddest cat? Are you playing to impress all your friends? Are you playing to be a virtuoso on your instrument? Or are you playing to touch other people, to connect with other people? I don't, you know, I mean, there's no right or wrong question, or no right or wrong answer, rather. But I think that that's a question that oftentimes gets overlooked, and I think it's probably the most important question, you know.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I'll tell you another quick story. You know, in Jackett's band, in Illinois Jackett's band, when I joined the band, I was the youngest trumpet player in that band by probably maybe 30 or 40 years. All the guys were elders, you know.
Wow.
Irving Stokes, who passed away, and Eddie Preston and Johnny Grimes. Johnny Grimes was in his 70s.
Wow.
Johnny Grimes, when he was like my age, was going to, you know, he was like, man, there was so much work. I could take off Saturday night and take my wife and go to the garden and see Sugar Ray Robinson box, you know, like he was, you know, and so I'm with guys that, you know, were living in the thing, man, you know. Yeah. And so I sat next to Irvin Stokes. A lot of guys don't know Irvin Stokes. Irvin was like a swing bebop, like he kind of was sitting on the fence of both those worlds. Yeah. You know, when he played, he was a master of plunger, but he played and he had the rhythmic sensibility and the melodic sensibility of like the swing players, but he had also the language of bebop players. Mm. And he was just a soulful swinging cat, man. He was great. And so I was playing lead in Jacket's band, but Jacket knew I improvised, so I got to blow a little bit too, you know. And so I knew that we were going to play this too. We were doing a week at the Vanguard, and we were going to be doing this tune that I had a little feature solo on. So I sat at home all day, like working out some slick substitution chords, and I'm going to work out some bad shit to play on my solo, you know, impress everybody. Blah, 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 blah. So I come time, I get up, I play my solo. I'm consciously trying to play the stuff that I had worked on to fit it into, you know, so I'm not really improvising, am I? I'm really just regurgitating the shit that I worked on in the practice room that afternoon. So I get done playing, the audience doesn't, usually I get good response from the audience, but that night I didn't get much of a good response. And I sat down and Stokes leaned over to me and says, "Who do you think wants to hear that bullshit?" He says, "Man, you sound like you're practicing. You probably were at home practicing that shit, weren't you?" He just called me right out.
Oh, man.
You know, and so I was like with my tail between my legs, and he's like, "Man, you know, just tell your story. Just play who you are. Yeah. Have confidence in who you are, and all the stuff that you work on will just come out in a natural kind of way. But if you're at home trying to figure out and plan it all out, you know, because you want to try and impress people with, you know, how good you can play your horn, nobody wants to hear that shit, you know." Yeah. And he was right. It was, you know, I mean, I remember his exact words because of how, you know, how on the money it was.
Yeah. And that's the same thing, you know, that happens in classical music too. People just they want to make things way more than what it is, and that's how. I mean, one of the reasons why I started this podcast is because I was so frustrated with a lot of things that are happening in the world of classical music. So I wanted to talk to people who share the same views, and then it turned to be much more than I thought it would be in talking to people like you and others. But sometimes it's just good to just be yourself and just bring the passion, the love, the care to the music that you've practiced so hard for, and not just overcomplicate things, you know. So
yeah, I think you're right, man. I mean, I think what else are you going to bring if you don't bring yourself, you know?
Yeah. Well, you know, we've been talking close to an hour, and I like to keep this around an hour. But one thing that we have not discussed, and it's partly my fault, is the martial arts. And I know you are a long time, you know, you've done this for a long time, and I don't want to ask the story behind where it started, but I want to know what you watch now, maybe, or what you practice now, what form of martial arts, a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I started when I was a kid, really. Yeah. I used to get, you know, beat up a lot. And where I grew up at Hampton Beach in New Hampshire, I used to surf, and there was a guy that was part of the surfing community there. We used to just call him Surfer Joe. He was kind of like, you know, one of these guys that, you know, there's something about him. I don't know what it is about him. But anyways, I found out after knowing him surfing for a while that he was a Green Beret in the Vietnam War. Wow. And so he, you know, one day was like, "Man, what's wrong with you? You look like you're upset." And I was like, "Man, you know, these cats from Boston, you know, they come up for the summertime, they're beating me up all the time." He says, "Well, don't you know how to defend yourself?" No, I do. So he started teaching me basically like military combatives and stuff. Yeah. And then I got into karate and, the Bruce Lee movies and the Kung Fu TV series and all that stuff, like, really got me into the martial arts at that age. So I kind of came through the karate thing, did a bit of Kung Fu, and then, got into boxing. I've been boxing for a long time. Boxing kind of led me to Muay Thai. I started doing Muay Thai probably in the late 80s. So boxing and Muay Thai has been my main thing for, a long time. And then an incident happened, an unfortunate incident happened, where a weapon came at play, in a bad situation on the way to a gig, an unfortunate situation. And I kind of froze up, and I was like freaked out by the weapon. I could handle myself, but oh shit, he's got a weapon. We're not boxing or kickboxing anymore. What the fuck is going on? So that led me to the Filipino martial arts, which is Kali, Arnis, or Eskrima, depending on what island. There's a million different systems in different islands, and they kind of have different. But those three names are the generic names: Arnis, Kali, or Eskrima, that Filipino martial arts are known by. Yeah. So I found an instructor, and I've been doing Kali for 26 years now. I'm a full instructor in Kali, and I'm a full instructor in Silat, which is also a Malaysian martial art. They're kind of cousins. Mm-hmm. I continue to box. I don't do as much Muay Thai because I've had knees, my ACL blew out, meniscus, so like too much kicking jacks my knees up. I grappled for a long time. I don't grapple as much because of so many injuries. Yeah. I taught for probably about 10 years. I was teaching in New York on a pretty steady basis, and then I kind of let that go once the Bruce Tour started in 2012, because it just wasn't fair for me to be teaching and not be there. And also at that point, a lot of my more advanced students were at the point where they really needed to be teaching for them to grow. So it was kind of a good time to just hand it off. Yeah. So I continue to train. I continue, just yesterday I was up in the Bronx at a gym up there, working out with a great trainer up there, and, just to stay fit. And, I love it. I'll probably be doing it for the rest of my life, much to the chagrin of my wife, who thinks I'm crazy. But, it's the process isn't that dissimilar to music. In a lot of ways, they're very similar, paths. Yeah. As odd as that sounds, it's true.
Yeah. Well, a couple of more questions before I let you go, but thoughts on the John Jones fight and Cormier and what transpired afterwards? Any thoughts on that?
Man, I don't know, man. I mean, I know I love John Jones. I'm a little partial because I was at an MMA camp in 2012, and John Jones was one of the instructors, and I got to move around with him in the ring for 2 rounds. So I think he's a brilliant martial artist. I think he has a jazz sensibility. He just creates stuff. Yeah. I don't know enough about the whole. I mean, I suspect that a lot of those guys are taking supplement, performance enhancement drugs. I just think it becomes a scene where, they just keep building a better mousetrap, and then they figure out a way to get around that one. And so I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what to think about it. I don't like all the smack. I mean, I think that the traditional martial arts ethos kind of got tossed away because guys were trying to prove what worked and what didn't work. Yeah. And what people were figuring out was a lot of this traditional stuff, you get a traditional karate guy and put him in there with a boxer, and he's getting his ass kicked by the boxer. Or you get, a traditional, praying mantis kung fu guy and put him in there with a guy who's a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he's getting his ass handed to him. Yeah. Okay, fair enough. But I think we threw a lot of the ethical and a lot of the quote, warrior behavior, ethos, honor and respect and humility, and a lot of that stuff got tossed. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would like to see some of that brought back in, because I think, especially for young guys, I think if you don't have that in there, if that kind of discipline, and that, because that's what I was raised on, that, you know, if you're a martial artist, that you're the guy that's the last guy to want to get into a scrap with anybody. You're the guy that's trying to cool things out and defuse the situation, because you have the confidence in your ability to handle yourself.
Yeah.
You have nothing to prove.
Yeah.
I think that some of that has gotten lost, and so I fear that there is a danger that what we end up with is just highly trained thugs, you know, highly trained bullies.
Oh, man,
which would be, you know. Now, having said that, I also know that guys that are boxers, professional fighters, professional MMA guys, they're in a business, you know, and they got to put asses in seats in order to get better paydays for themselves, and so there's the theatrics that go along with it, you know. And I know for a fact that some of the personas, because I know, you know, I'm friends with some pro fighters, and I know that some of them, their persona when they're in the ring and around that thing, that's not who they really are. They just kind of put on, they have their little character that they go into, because it's just, you know, part of the business. So I think that, you know, it becomes a situation where sometimes those things get conflated. We think that that's who those people really are. And maybe, you know, personally, I was with John Jones for about 4 days at this camp. He was a complete gentleman to everybody. He was gracious to everybody. I learned so much from his, you know, his portion of the, you know, it was him and John Danaher and George St. Pierre's team, Faraz and those guys. You know, so I don't know about, you know, I mean, look, if he was using performance enhancement drugs and they're illegal and he got busted for it, then he got busted, you know, and he has to pay the price of doing it. It's unfortunate, you know. He knows what he's doing. He's a grown-ass man. But I think he's a great fighter.
Yeah, he is. He truly is.
I think he's a great fighter. I think he's one of the best fighters out there. I think that, you know, I mean, and I respect Daniel Cormier. I think he's great too, but I don't think he's on the same level as John Jones. Not even close. Maybe wrestling wise, but that's about it.
Yeah. And one last question. I keep saying this, but we got to do this again, because I got
time, man. So I'm happy to talk.
I would love to talk to you as much as I can. But one more question. Again, a fight related question. One of the biggest fights of recent times, Mayweather McGregor. What did you think? What are your thoughts? Again, the reason why I ask is because I know you have all the many years of experience. I'm a fan, and I don't actually practice martial arts. I did very, very little when I was very young, but I don't practice. But I'm a big fan, and I follow a lot of the sports, boxing and mixed martial arts. But you have a different look at this as also a martial artist.
Well, I mean, it pretty much went how I expected. You know, I mean, in fact, I was like kind of. I was patting myself on the back a little bit, because it really went how you know, I mean, I said by the 8th round, but, you know, I pretty much figured that Mayweather was going to drag him out to the deep end of the pool, and that was going to be the end of that, you know. I mean, look, I thought that, you know, Conor maybe had a 90, you know, a 2% chance of maybe catching him with a punch and maybe hurting him, maybe. But look, man, there's having done both things, there's a big difference, you know, and it flows the other way, you know. I mean, if Mayweather got into the cage, it would last, you know, under a minute. You know, so it's kind of apples and oranges in a way. You know, it's kind of like saying, okay, here's this world-class trumpet player who plays in the New York Philharmonic. Well, let's bring him to the Vanguard. Well, he ain't going to do so good. You know, and conversely, you know, and I'm not, Joe Magnarelli's my good friend, and he would agree with me. If we, you know, if they brought Mags into the symphony and put some, you know, C trumpet parts in front of him, he might not do so good. So it's apples and oranges, you know. So I mean, they both made a lot of money. But, you know, just the most skilled striker, the most skilled, I don't know who that guy is in MMA right now, the guy who has the most skilled hands, he would be like a journeyman boxer at best. If we're just talking about hands.
Yeah.
Conversely, you can take the I mean, a guy like Lomachenko, who I think is like the greatest boxer of our generation. He's just a phenomenon.
How excited are you
Great as
for
a
the next
boxer.
fight? How excited are you for the next fight of Lomachenko?
Yeah, very. But as great as he is, and he is great, there's no doubt about it, if he got into the cage with, a B or even C level MMA guy, once that guy was able to kind of close in and link up and take him down, it's all over, man.
Yeah.
Because it's just a different set of skills.
Yeah.
So, it was a bit of a spectacle, I mean, it kind of went how I expected it to win. What I hope comes out of it, though, to be honest with you, is that I hope that MMA guys maybe start to realize that there's maybe a little bit more to boxing than they might think. It's not just jab, cross, hook, uppercut. There's a lot more movement, head movement, tactics, angles, because I think a lot of MMA guys are lacking in that, and their MMA game would improve if they started really getting some serious boxing skills together.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that maybe that is the takeaway from that.
Yeah.
But I think as far as pure boxer guys trying to fight an MMA guy, well, the James Toney, Randy Couture.
Oh, that's right.
You're just not gonna, you're not gonna go to a BJJ school in 6 months and be able to get it. That there's a little more of a process involved with getting those grappling skills together. It really takes some time, I think, before you can do that. And Muay Thai, learning how to kick and rotate your hips, the stance is different than how a boxer, sits down on his punches. It's all, it's a little different. It's like, it's like a classical trumpet player versus a commercial or a jazz trumpet player.
Yeah.
They're both playing trumpet. They're both excellent. They're both great, but it's just two different things.
Yeah.
That's my view on it.
Yeah.
It was fun to watch.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to read one more thing that you posted on your Facebook, which I thought was brilliant, and I want to read it. If you want to comment on it, great. If not, we'll end on that note, but I want to read it. And I think there was a picture with this, but I think it'll still make sense with no picture. You said, for martial artists, it is very important to train and spar with people from a variety of backgrounds. Irrespective of how effective your own system is, every system has patterns, and if you only train with your people, those patterns can become fixed or at the very least predictable. In this regard, sometimes the unskilled or ineffective have something to offer. I've spent a good amount of time watching videos of acts of violence from street scenarios, prisons, bars, as well as my own experiences playing in clubs for decades and seeing it firsthand, as well as speaking with people I train with whose jobs are in the realm of dealing with violence. The one thing they all have in common is there are rarely duels, almost always some form of ambush, and the attack never looks like the perfectly timed angled attack our training partners offer us in training. I believe there's a big lesson in this. And I think you had a picture. I think you had a picture with this too, and or maybe not. But I think this was great. I think what you said was great, and I think this applies to a lot of different things in life. So
yeah, I think so, man. I think it definitely. I mean, how many times do you sit in the practice room and work out a particular thing you want to play on a tune, and then when you get to the actual gig, it just doesn't happen that way because now it's real life.
Yeah.
It just doesn't. The environment isn't controlled.
Yeah.
Even if the I mean, the truth of it is even in the boxing ring or in the cage, it is a controlled environment.
Yeah.
There's rules, there's regulations. We know who we're fighting. We know when we're going to fight them. They're relatively the same weight and size. We know that, if I tap, the referee's going to stop it. If I get beat up too much with strikes, the referee's going to stop in. He's not going to have a weapon. He's not going to have friends. The ding-ding is going to start it. The next ding-ding is going to end it. Those are all controlled things. That's a lot different than, you're walking down the street with your kids and some guy just jumps out, and that's a whole different thing,
Yeah.
and it's a whole different mindset, and that's the thing that I got out of Filipino martial arts. It's because that's an art that really, it's not about sports. It's about killing. It's a guerrilla warfare. The Filipinos used for centuries fighting off, the Spaniards and everybody, and even their own tribal battles and whatnot. And so the assumptions of that art are that they are armed,
Yeah.
and that there are going to be more than one of them, and it's not going to be a duel, a friendly duel. It's going to be like you either kill them or they're going to kill you. And so it's a completely different kind of mentality to train with. So it's interesting,
Yeah. Well,
It's kind of like jazz in a way, isn't
yeah.
it? Because you don't know what's going to happen when you start, when you're improvising. We don't know what's going to happen.
Unless you've planned it.
Yeah. And then it never sounds as good.
Well, Barry, an absolute honor, an absolute pleasure to speak with you. And this probably is my longest podcast I've done, and we should do another one. And maybe this time around we'll actually start with the martial arts, because I want to hear as many stories or as many of your experiences as I can, because I'm really fascinated. So we should definitely do this again. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a beautiful day, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it, and I'll look forward to it. Have a great day.